Hello friends, it's Kristie Marcotte. Today we're going to talk about card sketches. I am asked all the time, how do I decide what card sketches to use in my videos? And while sometimes I really don't think about it, I did think about it, and I'm going to try to break it down on why I choose the sketches I do. There are tons of free sketches available online. Here's just a small sample. I do tend to go back to the same sketch sources quite often, mostly because I really enjoy their style. Now, some card sketches already include measurements, so you don't have to do any extra figuring out. Mojo Monday, their newer sketches, I think it's over 502, they all include measurements. And Operation Ride Home, they also include measurements, and some of their sketches will even include measurements for those matted layers. Card sketches are great for inspiration. You can follow them exactly, or you can modify them to work with the image, the sentiment, the leftover papers you still have available. There's so many options. Now, most of the card sketches do not include measurements. Here's a sketch from MFT. I love their sketches, but they never have measurements. I simply figure them out for an A2 size card. If you are really good with computers and know how to print out a sketch to A2 size, then it's super simple to figure out those measurements. I don't know how to do that. I try to print out this sketch to about 1/4 of an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. I want it big enough to be seen in my videos, but not too big to take over my work area while I'm recording a video. So I simply figure out the measurements myself. I'm going to show you how. I have recorded a video explaining how I figure out measurements many years ago, but honestly, the video quality is horrible. It was the second video I ever posted on my channel, and I have learned so much since then. So this is going to be an A2 size card. First thing I do is write the outside measurements just so people know what size card this will be. So I have my 5.5 by 4.25 size. Now, to figure out the measurements for that square on the sketch, I'm going to use the ruler on my trimmer. So the very top of my trimmer, I take an A2 size card base and I'm just holding it up to the trimmer. I shifted the right side of the card base off my trimmer, and now I'm visually looking where the left-hand side of that square will be on this card base, and that will give me that first measurement. So this one's going to be 3.25 inches across the top. And now I'll do the same thing for that side. So I'm going to turn my card base. And you could just use a ruler, but my trimmer is always on my desk and it has the ruler on top, so I just use that. I'll position the card base on my trimmer, shift it to the right, just that little bit where the edge of the square would be, and then I visually look on my ruler to see where the end of that square is. So again, I have 3.25 inches. And looking at it right away, it does look like it might be more of a rectangle, but I decided to go with a square. Now I'm figuring out the sentiment strip, doing the same thing, just holding it up to my trimmer. I'll run my finger along the card base and then up to the measurement on the ruler. So on this sentiment strip, I'm going to put 4.25 inches. Now my measurements are not exact. This is just something I figure out for myself. But I do still share those measurements with anyone that is interested. They're always over on my blog. Now for the width of that sentiment strip, I'm just going to guess at about 3/8 of an inch. And that's simply because it looks wider than 1/4 of an inch, but not quite as wide as 1/2 an inch. Now for those 3 circles, I am going to pull out my ruler. I'm showing the measurement on the bottom of this sketch. So an A2 size card would be 5.5 inches. So my printed sketch is about 3/4 of an inch short of that. So it gives me an idea about how big I should make these circles. So this one is about 3/4 of an inch, but I'm going to add on another 1/2 an inch and make it 1.25 inches. And then on the smallest one, I'm just taking a guess at 1/4 of an inch. Now, I generally don't even follow the measurements on that kind of feature on a sketch since it's really more of an embellishment. And that's all I do to figure out the measurements on a sketch. It really just takes me a few minutes. Now moving on to how I choose sketches when I'm doing one of my paper pad videos. I pulled out this really old paper pad from Doodlebug. It's called Love Bugs. It's from 2014. Not sure why I never used it. It's super cute. When I first get started with a paper pad, I'll look for a paper that I really want to make sure to feature. So this pattern has slightly larger design. Don't want to cut it up too much. So I'm going to pull out a variety of sketches that have this large image box. So there's the one with the rectangle. This would be perfect to add in the oval. There's another one that I use all the time. I can put it in this large rectangle. Another one with the oval. So these would all be great sketches to use with this larger pattern paper design. This sketch from Freshly Made Sketches is another great one to really feature some pretty paper. Now any of those sketches I just showed would also be great for featuring a large image or sentiment. But for this first card, I'm going to be focusing on pattern paper, especially since pattern paper is my favorite thing. So I'm going to pull out this flower heart paper design. Now obviously I'm going to need to choose a couple other pattern papers that are going to go with this design. Now for that stripe going across the card, I want something that's not too busy. And for the background piece, I'm looking for a pattern that's very muted or tone on tone. So this paper with the small polka dots is perfect. It's not going to compete with this really busy pattern paper. I'm going to look for one more for that strip. Again, looking for something maybe in between the tone on tone and the very busy. There are a couple options that would work. There's this pink graph paper with the tiny hearts. There's this black and white paper with a bunch of arrows. It's always nice when you're first starting a paper pad because you can choose any of the papers in the collection, whereas later on your choices are limited. I decided to go with this diagonal stripe pattern paper. So all of these papers really work well together and they don't compete with one another. I've taken all those papers and cut them out to the measurements on the sketch. Now I'm not going to be assembling most of these cards since that's not what this video is about, but I am going to lay them out together so you can see what it looks like. Now one thing people know about me is I love using cardstock layers. So you saw with them all laid out without the cardstock layers, they didn't have a lot of contrast and those papers really didn't pop. So I'm going to add some gray, this is like a charcoal color cardstock behind each of the pieces. Now I only had a small scrap of this cardstock, so I didn't have enough for that strip at the bottom. So one thing that I'll do is I'll modify the sketch and I'm going to cover up that little gap, just putting that rectangle a little bit lower. So there is the finished card with that first sketch. Many times I will choose a card sketch based on an image, maybe an ephemera piece, a stamp, or a large sentiment. Other times I'm using some cut-aparts. So this is a cut-apart that's included in the paper pad. It's 2 by 3 inches in size. So I want to use this on my card. I'm going to look for a sketch where I could feature this cut-apart. So here's a variety that would work. Now many of these already have the measurement and they aren't 2 by 3 inches, but that's okay. You can modify these easily. So even where this square is on the sketch, I can add this rectangle cut apart and it'll be just fine. Sometimes people are looking for that perfect sketch that will fit those ephemera pieces or cut aparts. Remember, you can always modify them to work for you. I'm going to use this sketch from OWH. It's another one I use all the time. I've gone ahead and cut out my pattern paper pieces. So for the background, I do have a pattern paper, but it's not very busy. It has very light designs on it. And then I have a tone-on-tone strip with the little hearts going across the card. And then for that little banner, I decided to bring in some cardstock. Sometimes just having that solid cardstock really helps balance out all the other papers. And here's the finished card. I did do a double matted layer for that cut apart image to make it slightly larger. Now what if you have a brand new sentiment stamp set and you really want to find a great sketch to use it? So this stamp set from Pink and Main has all these long, thin sentiments, and sometimes that can be tricky to find a sketch to use them. So here's a variety of great sketches to feature those thin sentiments. You can see I showed some of these before with the large pattern paper. It just depends on what I'm trying to feature for my card, whether it's that image, the pattern paper, or the sentiment. So for the next card, I'm going to feature a sentiment, and I'm going to use the card sketch that I just did the measurements for, and this will be the first time I use it. I'll use that really long sentiment on the Pink and Main set. It's "Wish I was there to celebrate your big day." I have some busy pattern paper for the background with all these adorable images and flowers, and then I'm bringing in a tone-on-tone pattern for that square. Of course, layering everything in some cardstock. Stamped out the sentiment, and you see how this will fit perfectly with the sketch. I'll just need to trim off the very end. Now for those circle elements, I'm going to switch them to hearts instead. I think it goes nicely with this whole design. The heart die cuts are not the same size as the circles on the sketch, but you can still see that same design concept. And it's always nice to add your personal touch to a card sketch. You can add extra embellishments, maybe a little banner in the corner. There's so many different options. So here is the card all finished. I did put a little bit of bling in the upper left-hand corner. It's hard to see in the video, but it is super sparkly. Whenever I'm doing a paper pad video, I end up with a ton of these 2 by 6 inch strips left over, since this is the leftover piece after you do a 4-inch background, like 4 by 5¼ So what do we do with all these 2-inch pieces? Well, here's an assortment of card sketches that are perfect for using up all of those strips. Again, don't always look at the measurements, you can modify them. So here's a great way to use 2 of those pattern papers. This one also is perfect for adding 2 of those pattern papers together. This one you could cut one shorter for that little banner on the right hand side. And this is a great sketch if you have horizontal images. You could actually use 3 different pattern papers on this sketch and then have a large image in that rectangle and then a sentiment for the oval. So that's another one I've used quite often. For my card, I'm going to use this sketch from OWH. This is a really fun one. I'll be featuring 2 of those long strips and also one of the cut aparts. I'm going to put that cut apart in the center where that small rectangle is. Now for the background, I'm using cardstock. So at this point in the video, I usually don't have any large pieces of pattern paper left over. So adding in that solid cardstock for the background works out great. I'll also use some cardstock for this thin strip that goes across the card. And then here is the cut apart. And I'll be layering all of these pieces with some red cardstock. Now one thing that's fun when you have that solid cardstock in the background, you could use an embossing folder or maybe a textured die just for some extra detail. I did use a die with these hearts in the background made by Honeybee Stamps for my card. And you can see it just adds that little extra touch and it goes perfectly with the sentiment. I always come to this point in my paper pad videos. All I have left are these small scraps. I could toss them all in the recycle bin. I think it might freak out some of my subscribers. So instead, we're going to look for a card sketch. So here is another favorite. It's great for using 1.5 inch squares. If you want to use a lot of squares on your card, this is a great sketch. These are all 1¼ inches. Here's a similar sketch to that OWH one. Has the 4 squares and then the little sentiment underneath. With all of the different sketch sites out there, you will find some similar sketches. Here's another fun one from Queen & Company. Features some small stitch squares. These are all fun options, and what I really like about these sketches is none of the pattern papers actually overlap. So when you're using all those busy pattern papers together, it'll still look okay on your card. Now another thing you can use, this is something I use all the time, lots of different cover-up dies where you can feature a ton of different pattern papers in all these cutout sections. So here are a couple that are made by Pinkfresh Studio. I haven't actually used my hexagon one yet. Here's another fun assortment. This is by Whimsy stamps and can feature some of those small squares. You could add a sentiment in the center. If you love to make slimline cards, there are some fun slimline dies where you can feature lots of those pattern paper scraps. This is another one from Whimsy Stamps. This is great for those 2-inch strips. You could feature that on the left and then add a sentiment or some smaller pattern papers in the circles. And for those really small scraps, these are so much fun. They're by Studio Katia. I have the circles, there's hearts, I have a hexagon, and also some squares. So those hearts, you can use the tiniest papers. Now one thing about this style die, sometimes those pieces are not all the same size. So they're not interchangeable. You do have to keep track of which one you cut out and what square or hexagon spot it went in. Here's another fun slimline die by Craft Galley. You can feature 10 different pattern papers. I've used that one several times. It's another fun one. So for this first card, I'm going to use one of the sketches. This is an MFT sketch. I have 4 of those pattern paper squares. They're all 1.5 inches. And I am going to add that layer between all of those pattern papers just to break up those busy designs. I'll use some solid cardstock for the background. And for this card, I have some shimmer paper, so it adds that extra little detail. And I will use that fun heart die by Honeybee Stamps for that white paper. Used another thin sentiment stamp from Pink and Maine. And then I'll also add just a small banner in the upper right-hand corner, little extra detail, and also a little bit of bling. There is the finished card, and then I also want to show how I use those cover-up dies. This is something people ask me all the time, so I'm going to try to show how I use it, and this is a slower video, so hopefully you'll be able to get the idea. I'm going to use the heart die by Studio Katia. I have an assortment of pattern paper scraps, and this is a fun die since you can feature up to 12 different patterns. I'm going to cut the pieces down. I just used my scissors. I'll lay it on the die, and sometimes I'll just run it through my machine loose like that, but once in a while that little piece of paper will shift. So sometimes I'll use some washi tape or tacky tape to hold all of these little paper scraps in place. When I am using the tape, I'll have multiple pieces taped down so I can just run it through the machine a few times instead of just cutting out one piece at a time. Using the cover-up dies for those scraps does take some extra time since you are cutting out all these tiny pieces, but I love the end result. It's so much fun. Now if you are using a pattern paper that is direction specific, make sure you're putting it the right direction. So one of the pieces I have is the heart, so I made sure that it's the correct direction. I'm also trying to make sure to rotate the different designs around. Now with this heart die, it doesn't matter which heart I cut out, it'll fit in every single opening. Whereas if I have maybe a circle die that has 12 different circles, sometimes I have to keep track of this is the upper left-hand circle, this is the lower right-hand circle, and then I'll just lay them on some paper while I cut them out. Just make sure they're all still going to fit. Sometimes they're just slightly a different size and then they don't fit as nicely. The disadvantage of using the tape when you're cutting out all these pieces is you do end up with that small piece of tape on the back of your die cut. So I'll just peel that off. Make sure you're using a tape that's easy to remove. This die also has that heart frame that goes around each of the hearts. I like to leave that piece out. It's pretty small, hard to glue down, and by leaving it out, it'll be really easy to attach each of these little hearts, and I won't have to worry about one of them not fitting in one of the openings. So I've cut out the background. There are two different dies with this set. It has the scallop die, and then you'll take the heart die and lay it on top and then run that through. I'm going to put some glue on the back side and attach another piece of the white shimmer paper. I didn't realize I had two different colors of this shimmer paper. I think one was an older pack. So then I'll take all of these little hearts and just glue them into the opening. It's also fun to add a little dimension to the back so you could pop up all of those hearts as well. On one of the hearts, I did use some solid paper. I think it was actually some of the pattern paper. Doodlebug used to have one sheet of pattern paper that was just a solid color, but I stamped the sentiment on that heart. Now I am going to speed up this portion since I'm just gluing down the rest of the hearts. Trying to alternate the colors and the patterns so I don't have two pinks next to each other or two stripes next to each other. It doesn't always work out that way, just depends on what pieces I have left over. Now once I have all of my hearts glued down, I'm going to add this panel onto some red cardstock. See how it really makes that whole panel pop now. And the only thing I usually add to this style card is maybe a little bit of bling. And by this point, I am usually finished with the paper pad. Now another question I'm asked all the time is, where do I find those card sketches? Well, let's head on over to my blog. My blog is at KristieMarcotte.com. I share a ton of information on my blog. This is always a good resource if you're wondering what product I use, what sketch I use, you want the measurements for a sketch. You can sign up for email notifications whenever I publish a new post. But let's head up to the top bar here. I have all this information on that right hand side. I have this area on the left where it's a little bit about me, so you can always click on that. You head over to where I shop. I have a list of my favorite shops. These are also affiliate links and help support my channel. There's a list of my favorite craft supplies. If you want to check out my 6x6 paper pad tutorial, you can click on that. There are the sketch sites. There's also a contact form, so if you want to ask me a question, you can go there. And then there is the little magnifying glass if you want to do a search on my blog. Maybe if you're wondering if I've used a specific paper pad. But let's head over to the sketch sites. So if we click on this, it's going to open up a page. And I have a bunch of different sketch resources listed here. Some of these websites aren't sharing new sketches, but they still have their blog up with all of their sketch information. So let's go ahead and click on Sketch Saturday. They usually share a new sketch every Saturday. So this is how I go and find those sketches. So I'm just going to scroll down and look for their newest sketch. If I think this one looks like fun, I'll go ahead and print it out, add some measurements at some point, and then include it in all the other sketches for when I'm doing a paper pad. I keep all of the printed sketches in an expandable file folder, separated by website and also in chronological order. If you just finished watching one of my videos and you really want to try one of the sketches, you can go directly to that post. So let's say you just watched my Queen and Company, Frankie and Friends video, and there's a sketch in there you really want to try out. So here is what a blog post looks like. I have all of the information. Underneath every single card, I list all the products, and I'll also list the sketch and even a link to the sketch site. So maybe you love this Mojo Monday sketch and you want to go and check out the website. So if we click on that, this is going to bring you to Julie's awesome page. I love her sketches. And this will have some more inspiration for that sketch. So she is the creator, designer of this sketch. This is where I find it. I do not design any of the card sketches I use. I'm so grateful for talented designers like Julie who provide these card sketches for crafters to use. If you're ever looking for a card sketch I used, you can always head over to my blog. I do share my coordinating blog post link in the description box on all of my YouTube videos. Hopefully I was able to answer all the questions about how I select card sketches. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.